Okay, looks like we're recording now.
Okay.
Good morning. Thank you for being here, Ted. As you know, we have spoken a few times. I launched my accessibility blog this week. I'm super excited, called The Accidental Ally, and the goal is to just share my journey on accessibility, how it started. I want to kind of get into how I went from ally to champion, working on the accessibility program at SAMS, and then also some thoughts on beyond accessibility. What are some things that I'm working on now? One of the important aspects of my journey has been the people that I met along the way, and those are the people that I have been able to learn from. So I had this idea that part of the blog, in addition to the writing, could also be a conversation series to bring in people such as yourself that I met along my journey. So I'm really excited that you're here because I have a list of very interesting questions to ask you so that we can get to know you a little bit better, and also the work that you have been doing on accessibility. Before we get into that, I think I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but describe what your friends would say about you. Before you answer the question, I do want to say that before I met you, I had heard about the legend of Ted Drake. You were very difficult to get a hold of. I know I've been trying to get a hold of you for a while, and we finally met at CSUN last year. But there were a couple of observations I made about you. One was that when we did manage to sit down, even if it was for a short period of time, I felt that you were very easy to talk to and very approachable. And of course, when we sat down and talked about things, I had a list of questions that I wanted to run through really quickly. And you gave me a really practical advice. And for a person that was starting off and very overwhelmed with the amount of information that was available on accessibility, it made a ton of sense to have someone give you very practical, tangible things to go do. Which is exactly what my team and I did, and we kind of made a lot of progress after that meeting with you at CSUN. So I want to thank you for that advice and for taking the time to meet with us. And I've told you this multiple times that the short amount of time you spent with us giving us that practical advice actually set us on the path to success. So deep gratitude for that. So I would like to ask you, introduce yourself, but tell us what your friends would say about you.
I think my friends would probably say that I'm an open person where I do try to help a lot of people. I get a lot from my mother where I'm intellectually curious. I'm always trying to learn something new. And also from my mother, she was a teacher, so I'm very comfortable teaching people and sharing what I know.
Is it true you were also a teacher, Ted, at some point in your career?
Yeah, I used to teach photography at a university. And I taught myself how to be an engineer. So while I was teaching photography, I was also learning how to be a web developer. And I had to quit teaching in order to join Yahoo. It was like, do I continue teaching or do I take this once in a lifetime offer?
Yeah.
So I had to.
So you're a learner by heart, and you're also someone who enjoys teaching others. What else can you tell us about yourself?
I've always been the type of person that's not afraid to do something. So if there's a challenge, I'll just do it. I don't let fear try to keep me from doing something.
Yeah.
So that could be pulling an engine out of a car and trying to rebuild it to, if I wanted to learn PHP overnight. I mean, that's the kind of, I built search engines just so I could learn how to program with PHP. So it's like, if there's a challenge, I'll just try to do it. I don't expect success, but at least I learn along the way.
I'd love to grow up to be you, because I think fear is one of the biggest reasons, I have held myself back many times in my career. It's something I'm working on, but making a lot of progress, because I think as you get older, you also become bolder. But let's use that as a segue into the next question. It's more of a story I heard when I think at CSUN this year, where we went out for dinner. I heard your team make fun of you that there was a point in your career where you actually didn't know what your title was. Is that right?
It's true. I've never been a career focused person. I've always been focused on, here's the problem, I need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I joined into it, I remember they started me as a senior engineer, which I thought sounded pretty good. When I was at Yahoo, I worked at Yahoo for 7 years. I never got a promotion. So I just figured, it wasn't a big deal.
Uh-huh.
So I just thought I was a senior web developer engineer at Intuit for maybe about 4 years. And then my boss said, oh, by the way, we made you a principal engineer, which is kind of the highest that you can go until you become an architect.
Right.
And I just looked at her and said, what is a principal? What does this mean? I had no idea. I didn't know she was putting me up for a promotion or anything, but
yeah.
She essentially said that everybody said I was doing the work of a principal, and they were surprised that I wasn't a principal.
Right.
Because I founded the Front End Engineering Summit at Intuit because I realized that all of the engineers were doing the same thing, but doing it 100 different ways. There wasn't enough communication between the web developers at Intuit, like we had at Yahoo. So we needed a way that we could get people together to start talking about using common platforms, using common patterns. And I knew that that was critical for us to actually have accessibility.
Right.
We couldn't be accessible if everybody was doing something different and there was no commonality.
Right. I want to spend a couple of minutes on this before we move on to the next question. I think that in general, if you look at how success is viewed today in the corporate world, a lot of it is very title based, right? And they talk about the climbing the corporate ladder, and I kind of gave up on that a few years ago because I felt like it took away from me the joy that I felt towards my work. And I decided that I would focus more on the challenge and the work versus focusing on pursuing a title. How important is that mindset specifically when you're working on accessibility? Because there's not a ton of accessibility titles out there. Most companies actually do not have anything kind of earmarked for accessibility specifically. You're kind of given a very generic title like staff or senior or principal engineer. It doesn't necessarily distinguish you as an expert in accessibility. And I think the reason why I point this out is that a lot of professionals I have met who work on accessibility are doing it because they're intrinsically motivated, which is so refreshingly awesome, right? I mean, I think that to me, that is what attracted me to accessibility, is that a lot of people that I've met were doing what they were doing because they believed in the work and they were really drawn to it intrinsically. Would that be your observation?
Yeah, I think there's two groups of accessibility professionals now. There's the old group like myself. I would include people like Bruce Lawson, Steve Faulkner, John Folio, the people that have been around for a long time. We had no idea this was going to be a career.
Yeah.
It was just something that we found interesting and we were passionate about it. We saw the impact we were having on customers, and it was something that we did. And we just worked on it, and we taught other people how to do it. We wrote articles, and then people started to realize that accessibility was something that was needed and required. But our whole goal for this group of people, Victor Sarin, Alan Brightman, I mean, I could just keep Mike Shabanik, our goal was always to put ourselves out of business, I think, was to basically teach everybody else what to know. Today, there's a new generation of accessibility professionals, and they're getting certified.
Yep.
They're coming in with the goal of actually having a accessibility profession.
Yeah.
And
they have careers and pursuing titles, and is that a good thing? Do you view that as a good thing?
Oh, I think it is a good thing, because there has to be, I mean, that's part of my whole goal, was to prepare Intuit for Saga or someone else to take over for me.
Mm-hmm.
The original group, we were more of, you got to remember back in 2000, the web technology was in such bad shape because everything was visual. It was all layout tables. It was just junk markup. So there was a lot of interesting things we were doing just to make web pages work and to be accessible.
Mhm.
Now people can come in and they don't have to worry about all that stuff. They can worry about, the intricacies of different ARIA rules. Well, we didn't even have ARIA back then.
Right, right.
They're dealing more with legal aspects and with management aspects. And so I think that there's two completely different problem sets,
Okay.
goals, and moving forward, how you're going to,
The,
someone that's working on accessibility for the web today is going to be working on accessibility for virtual reality tomorrow.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So the important thing is that more people are getting involved and interested and becoming aware of this field as an area of study, as an area that you can work in, that you can get, that you can contribute to, which I think is fantastic. A slight, kind of a shift in the conversation. I want to talk about inclusion. And to me, inclusion is such an important aspect of the work you do on accessibility. And there's many different ways you can define inclusion. I'll tell you what it means to me. To me, inclusion means, there's a lot of things it means to me, but I think the one that resonates the most is inclusion means equal opportunity. And for someone who, I came to this country 21 years ago at this point, as a 21-year-old person. And along the way, I was given opportunities, whether it is to study, to, take on responsibilities that I had no experience for, or, have met people such as yourself who have given me guidance to pursue interests and passions. And it's because of that opportunity I have been able to kind of realize my potential, and I still am on that journey. What does inclusion mean to you, Ted?
to me, it's not necessarily just opportunity.
Yeah.
For me, inclusion means that when you have a diverse workforce, when you have people on a team that come from different environments,
Yeah.
You're going to get a better product.
Yeah.
And to me, accessibility, when I first learned, it was because I was working for a museum and I became the website manager. And because it was a museum, we had to worry about this thing called Section 508.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody really knew what it meant. And so to me, it was more of an abstract term until I started meeting people that had disabilities. And when I started working at Yahoo, and I started working with Victor Saran, and I started working with other people that had disabilities, you could start seeing that by including people with disabilities, also people from lower income, from multiple countries, women, different ethnicities. When you end up having a team that's diverse, you end up with better products because you're not going down a narrow road. You're going down a product path where you're starting to better explore the problems and the opportunities of all your customers. And so I like to lead with inclusion as building a better team,
Yeah.
and building a better product.
Yep.
I've also worked to try to not just think about inclusion as people with disabilities.
Yeah.
But I also have worked with, working with veterans, and I've worked with different communities to try to get more.
Yep.
And I'm a self-taught engineer. So the other thing is, we have to recognize that amazing people come from environments that are not Stanford.
Yes.
And four-year universities.
Yes.
So inclusion means also looking at hiring people that maybe graduated from a junior college and have been working for a nonprofit for 3 years,
right,
because they couldn't get a job because they weren't fast enough on a computer,
Right.
So one of the best engineers at Yahoo we got was a guy that never graduated high school. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to say for sure. I think, as far as I know, the story is he never graduated high school.
Mm-hmm.
But he was leaving comments and pull requests on some of our code.
Mm-hmm.
And the engineers on that product, they started looking at, who is this person that's including all this amazing updates?
Yeah.
And so they reached out to him, they hired him. I mean, that's the kind of diversity and inclusion we need, is that you're looking at the person.
And I think also we need people like you and the folks at Yahoo who recognize that person's potential and gave him the opportunity to come on board. I think you need both kinds of people, right? You need people who are not, afraid of trying new things, but also people who are keeping their eyes and ears open for that, right? And giving those people the right opportunities.
I was just a couple of quick stories. I was hiring for a position because when I was at Yahoo, I was leaving to go to Europe, and we needed to backfill my position. We interviewed a lot of people that were engineers, and we never really saw the person that was the right person until we interviewed a guy from New Jersey who was a piano teacher. And even though he didn't have the engineering experience, he had the engineering knowledge. He had studied and he had worked on it. And he had done his own little tests, but he hadn't worked on an actual product. But he was the one that we hired because you can teach engineering, but you can't teach curiosity.
Yeah.
And a lot of people with disabilities, they don't get into that four-year college. And they don't get into that, first career that's at an amazing tech company. So we need to keep an eye out for high quality candidates that don't come through the standard funnel.
Yeah. Yeah. What are 3 things you do every day specific to accessibility?
I was looking at this question when you sent it earlier, and it's difficult because every day is different.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I enjoy about accessibility. Every day is completely different.
Yeah.
One of the things I do is I try to learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So I listen to podcasts. I listen to AT Banter, Blind Bargains. I listen to Alice Wong's Disability Visibility, Ouch from BBC. There's that new one, 13 Letters. There's the Sound. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a small snippet of sounds. So that's one thing I'm always trying to do, looking on Twitter or looking wherever I can, just to see what's new and what I can learn.
And I'll provide links to those podcasts on my blog when I write this up. Yeah. What are 3 things that, are must do's and don't do's for any accessibility professional, in your opinion?
If you're going to be an accessibility professional for engineering, not necessarily for design or management, I think it's critical that you actually read the standards.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, but you need to read the W3C standards for HTML and ARIA and WAY. If you don't actually read them, then you're not going to understand the connection between some of these obscure elements. Another thing is you need to volunteer. You need to get out into the community. You need to become so comfortable and familiar with people of different abilities and mental health, looks, everything. If you want to be an accessibility professional and every time you meet someone with a disability, you're still kind of surprised, then you're not truly getting the empathy.
Right. And how do you
do that? Well, you have to get out in the community. It's not something you do once a year, but it's something that you do on a regular basis. You get to meet people. You start to recognize people in your friendship circles. You volunteer.
Yep.
You go to stores and shops that are owned by people with disabilities. It's that kind of thing. Go to schools. I've done presentations at the disability centers for universities, so you can actually meet the students, things like that.
I know that you also encourage your team to volunteer at local nonprofits, and also I think some of your team members also serve on the board of local nonprofits, which I know from my own board experience with the local nonprofit that it's an incredible experience for you to get really grounded in the community and actually do things that make a difference. So all great advice. In terms of innovation, and I know Intuit is very big on innovation. I've spent enough time at Intuit as an employee to know that it's part of the DNA of every employee. When you take innovation and accessibility and put them together, what happens? Because you're in an environment where innovation is already part of the DNA. You're working on accessibility. Do those two go together?
I'm not going to limit it to Intuit because I think that would be too specific. But I think that when you're dealing with innovation and you're dealing with accessibility, there are a couple of things that are beneficial for working at accessibility first. One is that if I was going to be creating a new product, and I focused on the disability community, I have a smaller customer base that's more passionate, and I can actually have more communication with them. Let's just say I'm creating a virtual reality game. And so of my initial test group, I have maybe 10 people that have different disabilities. If I can make that virtual reality game work for them, then I know that virtual reality game is going to work for millions. But if I have that same test group and they're all, let's say 18 to 20-year-old white men, that doesn't mean that that's actually going to work for everybody. So that's one aspect, is that you can really fine tune and you can build a better product when you're working with more customers that are diverse. The other thing is that if I'm building something that's truly unique and I work with the disability community first, there's funding differences. For instance, if I'm building a new Braille, no, let's not use Braille, let's use something like Aira, which is a virtual assistant. They focused on the blind and low vision community. They've created a wonderful package. They also knew that the people that are using Aira might be getting subsidies to help pay for that.
Yeah.
If they had tried Aira and they focused on the general population, they wouldn't have been able to have the focus. But now that they have it working really good, it wouldn't be that much difficult for them to now start saying, oh, now you can use Aira if you have short-term memory loss, if you have traumatic brain injury, if you have dementia. They can start expanding much larger. But because they focused on a really narrow community, they were able to create an excellent product, and then they can go mainstream. I think focusing on the accessibility first innovation means that when you finally do finish the product, you're in much better shape to go big. That's why we see a lot of accessibility innovations go mainstream, from text-to-speech engines to curb cuts, noise canceling. There's a lot of things.
Yeah. And also, I think one of the things that I learned along the way is that, especially with digital experiences, right? When you build accessibility from the design phase into an experience, say an e-commerce site, it benefits everyone. It makes the site experience a great usable experience for everyone involved. Doesn't necessarily focus just on the accessibility pieces. Definitely an advantage there. This is a question that, I've asked a lot of people who've worked on accessibility for a very long time, and I get very different kinds of answers. Why do you think we're still talking about the importance of accessibility in 2020?
I don't think that there was anything that was wrong that we missed, which is why we're still talking about accessibility. I think technology changes constantly. When it comes to web development, we're changing JavaScript platforms every 2 years. So there's always going to be this evolution. There's always going to be a need to fix what gets introduced. There's always going to be new engineers that need to be educated. Even with something like iOS, they haven't stayed static. The iOS operating system changes. So this is not a industry where you can rest on your laurels. You have to learn something new every day. At the same time, we also have a rapidly aging population.
Yeah.
And that aging population is going to need more and more assistive technology. So I think what we're seeing a larger audience. We're seeing technology that's rapidly evolving. And I think we're also seeing faster turnaround on communication. Someone can send an email or a tweet or send you a message on Instagram and let you know, hey, this isn't working for me. Yeah. So we can actually get that immediate feedback.
Yeah, yeah. We have only 5 more minutes. I want to ask you 2 more questions before we wrap this up. I know that you've done a great job creating the Champions program, the Accessibility Champions program at Intuit, and the mindset behind that is that everybody should be involved in accessibility. You create tools, checklists, information, training, workshops. you've created a community around accessibility that's super passionate about learning and teaching others and learning, which is exactly where we want to be. But the question is, how do you engage with executives on accessibility? Because it's been something that I've faced some challenges on. How do you think about it, and what are some things you do to keep the executives engaged?
I'm fortunate at Intuit in that we're customer focused, very customer focused. So that being said, when I do go to the executives, and I do go quite often, it's usually talking about a customer experience. And a lot of times it's about a success that a team has had.
Yeah.
So my philosophy with the executives, when I'm saying executives, I'm talking about CEO, I'm talking about the VPs. When they hear from me, they know that it's something worth knowing about, because I don't blast them. But one of the things I do is our Accessibility Champion program. When someone becomes a level 2 champion, they become a local leader, I send a notice not to just them and their manager, but that goes to their manager's manager, the VP of their product, and it goes all the way to the CEO. Because becoming a level 2 champion and leading your local region or your product means you're taking a big step ahead. And I want people to be recognized for that.
Yeah.
So that's my goal with executives, is you want them to understand the customer experience, the successes that we're having. And definitely if there's a problem that they need to know about, then I let them know about that.
Yeah.
And that's kept it pretty open.
Yeah.
When I see them on, street or something like that, saying hi to them, just keeping it friendly.
Right.
And I should say that our has not been a big proponent of it since it started. Actually, before I started.
I do want to share a couple of insights from my own experience here. Are you able to hear me? It says the internet is unstable.
Yeah.
Okay. The couple of mistakes I think that I made early on was that, going to the execs too early, asking for funding. I think that is not necessarily the right strategy. And two is also constantly only talking about problems can also create the perception that accessibility is more of a problem child. I think what I had success with is when we did engage with customers who, either have a problem with the way the accessibility is implemented, or are finding that the only way they can get food is because the accessibility features allow them to order food to be delivered to their home. When you take that feedback to the executives, that's when they go, oh my gosh, you're actually doing something that's really, really important, that's impacting somebody's ability to get food. Those were things that resonated. And I think another strategy that, it wasn't really a strategy, it was kind of like an impromptu thing that I was kind of driven to do, was to do a demo. And of course, I don't have a visual impairment, so I had to blindfold myself to actually show them how I would navigate, somewhat navigate using a screen reader. And that was also a very eye-opening experience for a lot of people, because they had never seen how a screen reader works on a screen. So those were things I feel like, kind of taking it back to the customer always resonates, versus going into the conversation with accessibility being packaged as this business initiative, or this something that needs funding and money and things like that. So great to hear from you that that's also been your approach. So good to have that validation. In wrapping up this conversation, of course, I thank you for your time. If you had a magic wand, or a genie, or whatever magical powers, what about accessibility would you change immediately?
I was thinking about this. There's one project I've wanted to fix for a long time, and I know someone like Google could do this. When you look at a map and you look at people with cell phones, you could overlay a heat map where phones tend to aggregate, and that would allow us to know where the entrance is to a store. Because if I'm a blind person, I need to go to a store, I can find the address, but I don't necessarily know where the door is located on that address. And to me, it seems like it'd be really great if I'm using my mobile phone and I'm using a map to know exactly where the door is, and I don't have to sit there and try to figure out where it is.
Mm.
That's one of the projects I've always wanted to solve, and I know it could be done. I just haven't had the time and the technology.
And do you think the retailers would also have to participate by putting some kind of sensors on the main entrance? How would we?
No, not at all. It would be completely anonymous. If they could track where mobile phones are, because they're sending out pings, they know where a phone is. And if thousands of phones go into an address at the same 2 feet, that's where the front door is.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great idea. Have you written it up or emailed someone at Google?
I've talked to Victor Sarn about it. No, I haven't. It's one of those things where I kept wanting to do, but I never did.
Awesome. Ted, you are a great resource and asset to the accessibility community. And the one thing we have in common is that we love to learn. And I hope to have you back on to have another conversation about more topics around accessibility. I'm also speaking to Sagar on your team to get his perspective as a young engineer that got introduced to accessibility and what his journey has been. There's a lot more conversations coming up, so I appreciate your support. Let's keep the conversation going. And before we leave, I'm curious, what are you going to learn today that is new?
I've been actually listening to there's a new podcast from BBC about a couple, she's a host, that have disabilities and what it's like being in shutdown during the pandemic. So that's one of the things I've been trying to learn a lot more about, is the mental health aspects of what's going on. Yes, yes.
Well, thank you for sharing, and don't forget to wash your hands, stay healthy, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.